Now, Prime Minister Tony Abbott heads to Tokyo on Saturday for further talks on that all-important free trade agreement with Japan.
One farmer has told Lateline there's no point in signing up to a deal unless it improves conditions for beef and dairy producers.
I'd be very disappointed at our government for agriculture to be signing something that doesn't deliver something significant back to agriculture. And I think they need to be really working really hard and mindful of that. So I would be making sure that everything in his possibly can that he can do to get as much market access for us as possible. Otherwise, it's not worth it. It is going to be a tough task, but I also believe that they will see the benefit in getting a free trade agreement with Australia, and a significant free trade agreement with Australia. Not just words. We've got to really put actions into place.
Yep, that farmer speaking for a lot of Australian farmers. The Prime Minister will be joined on his Asian trip by a business delegation of more than 600 people, including the likes of James Packer, Andrew Forrest and Gail Kelly. And the Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister, Josh Frydenberg, will also be among the throng. And he joins us now. Josh Frydenberg, good morning.
Nice to be with you, Virginia.
A significant improvement on the arrangements for Australian farmers when it comes to tariffs imposed by the Japanese. Significant. How do you quantify that?
Well, currently the tariff on the beef exports is about 38.5%, and we are the largest exporter of beef into Japan. So if we could get that down, that could even lead to better gains for our farmers. But can I say, it's just really important that we get a high-quality FTA with Japan, and that we get an FTA with Japan, because a lot of our partners in the region, in ASEAN, in Europe, in the United States, they have free trade agreements with countries like Japan, and we don't want our farmers, our manufacturers, our businesses to be at a competitive disadvantage vis-à-vis those countries.
Well, indeed, otherwise there's simply no point getting the agreement. But you started off by saying that that would be a good thing, but surely you have to come back with some sort of substantial tariff cuff, or there's no point to this.
Well, it's part of the negotiations, and Andrew Robb has done a fantastic job, first securing an FTA with Korea, something that the previous government couldn't do, and he's got very close here with Japan.
But where are we? So we've got 38.5%. Japanese media is reporting at the moment that Tokyo might even cut tariffs on Australian beef imports to 30%. Is that what you understand? 30% might end up being the bottom line.
Well, let's just see where it washes out.
But is that too speculative? Is that too hopeful?
I think it's all a bit of speculation at the moment. The point is the Prime Minister is going to have face-to-face discussions with Prime Minister Shinzo Abe in Japan. They have a very good relationship. And indeed, our relationship with Japan is one of the bedrocks of our security and our economic ties in the region. You can go back to 1957, Virginia, when Sir Robert Menzies and his equivalent in Japan, Prime Minister Kishi, signed a commerce agreement, and that laid the framework for the next 4 or 5 decades. So it's a great relationship.
It certainly is. Our time is short. Let's try and stick to the here and now, though. Do you have a bottom line, though, a bottom line figure from which you would walk away from an agreement?
I'm not going to put a number on the table other than to say it has to be a quality FTA.
When Japanese media is talking about 30%, could you live with that?
I'm not going to confirm or deny what the number may end up being, because we just don't know where the prime ministerial discussions will go one-on-one.
There are significant bilateral and multilateral negotiations occurring right around the world at the moment that Australia is involved with. I don't want to bore people senseless, but it's important to run through these. The Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the China FTA, the South Korea FTA, possibly the EU FTA in the future, which we might be a part of that. What's the urgency of concluding an FTA with Japan now?
Well, because a lot of their partners in the region have actually got those agreements with Japan, and if they've got market access into Japan, then, and if we don't, then that puts our producers at a competitive disadvantage. I think the one really important point for your viewers this morning to understand is 1 in 5 Australian jobs relates to trade. We are a trading nation, and in our region we'll have 3 billion people, Virginia, that will be in the middle class between now and 2030. That creates huge opportunities for Australia in tourism, in agriculture, in education, and these free trade agreements put a framework in place for that job creation here in Australia.
Well, that's the optimistic view, but the view being expressed in Japan is that Japan sees Australia as a soft target in this FTA round, and that they can get some soft deal secured, whereas we'd be better off waiting off for the USA to conclude their agreement with Japan and piggyback on that deal. Doesn't that actually seem like a smarter way to go?
Look, our bottom line, whether it's with Korea, China or Japan, has been we need a quality FTA. So we won't sign on to a bad deal. We'll get a good deal.
So Australia's no soft target in this?
Absolutely not.
How do you quantify that?
Well, in terms of the gains that will be delivered, so for example, the Korea-Australia FTA, that's going to produce a $5 billion dividend for Australia over the next decade or so. If you look at agriculture, it will increase by 73% Australian exports of agriculture into Korea over the next 10 to 12 years. That's a huge dividend for the Australian economy. We want the same sort of dividend out of the agreement we can get with Japan.
In return for a deal on beef imports, Japan would demand Australia probably eliminates its 5% tariff on auto imports to match the South Korean deal. Does that seem reasonable?
Well, that's one of the issues that are part of the negotiations. Absolutely, to be part, we have to give up something if we're going to get something.
Given that's the case, and that's what most people expect if a successful round concludes, and given the car tariff issue was always going to be a part of the deal, our local car manufacturing industry never really stood a chance with those tariff arrangements always on the cards.
Look, our car manufacturing was always doing it tough because of the cost being imposed by the previous government, namely the carbon tax and the falling productivity around the labour market relations issues. They were the huge cost to that industry, and they paid the price for that.
But with the tariff issue, I mean, wasn't it incumbent on the government to always be honest about the future of the car industry here?
Those decisions made by Holden, Toyota and Ford were not related to the tariff issue. They were related to the cost of doing business in Australia. And as you've heard me say before, the cost of the carbon tax, Virginia, was $400 per car. The cost of tough workplace relations issues were also a major impediment to doing business in this country. I mean, Toyota was in the federal court a couple of weeks before their announcement trying to get a better deal with the unions, and the unions wouldn't budge.
What new markets can you guarantee will be opened up by the agreement? Well,
I think just bedding down agriculture, financial services, education, tourism, they're the sort of areas where there's going to be huge spin-offs for Australia.
Now, we heard Martin Parkinson speak last night about the GST needing to be put back on the table, particularly in relation to health services. What's the government's view? Well,
firstly, Martin Parkinson is a very distinguished senior public servant. I thought his speech was very important. It was a wake-up call. It was a reality check for the Australian economy. In terms of the GST, there's no plans whatsoever to change the GST, and in fact you'd need all the agreements of all the states, and all the money that goes from the GST does go towards the states. But what Martin Parkinson put his finger on was the fact that Australia does have a productivity challenge, it does have an ageing workforce, it does have declining terms of trade, and we're seeing increasing government expenditure over time. So we do need to rein in that expenditure, and tough decisions will need to be made in the budget.
So we're not just leaving aside the budget, though. Does the government have an appetite for the kind of comprehensive taxation reform that Martin Parkinson and others are calling for?
Look, taxation reform starts with getting rid of the carbon tax and the mining tax, and we've also said we're committed to a company tax cut. So we do believe in tax reform and in tax cuts. I mean,
that's not the kind of tax reform Martin Parkinson's talking about.
Well, he's talking about GST.
Well, he's not just talking about cutting taxes, though, more importantly. I mean, clearly people are talking about other taxes having to be imposed and raised if this country is going to be able to afford to provide the programs that governments promise.
We're the party that cuts taxes, not imposes and increases taxes.
So when we talk about taxation reform, all your government means is simply getting rid of a couple of taxes.
Well, streamlining taxes. I mean, in Australia, and this is the Henry Tax Review talking now, found that there were 125 taxes in Australia, but 115 of those taxes just produce 10% of the revenue. We have 10 taxes producing 90% of the revenue. I mean, I think we're overtaxed if you're looking at the state and the federal levels of government. We do need to streamline that.
And just finally this morning, in the context of the free trade agreement and hearing the news from Boeing this morning, and just that simple figure that was totted up this morning by our reporter, about 1,000 jobs having gone in just the last few months in Australia. What is the government's plan for jobs? How do you actually get people into employment?
Well, Virginia, a few points. Firstly, it's tragic when any jobs go, and to the families, we say as a government we're actually determined to try to help you find employment elsewhere, because this is a great tragedy. The second thing is jobs are being created across the economy. In February, the last ABS labour market data figures found that job increases in full-time employment actually went up 80,000, the highest single month increase since 1991. That's pretty significant. We believe if we can boost productivity by cutting red tape, if we can lower the overall tax burden by getting rid of the carbon tax and by the mining tax, if we can boost female participation in the workforce through mechanisms such as the paid parental leave scheme, we do believe will increase employment in this country.
Josh Frydenberg, good to talk to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Virginia.